Good morning, everybody. For reasons best known to myself, I'm very croaky this morning, so I've got a glass of water in case I need it, but I did do nothing to deserve it last night at all. Nothing at all. Right. If I could move straight on to the first slide, please. Oh, yeah, it's this one, isn't it? I do that. I remember that. Thought somebody else do that. Yeah, okay, good. I suppose throughout the last 10, 12 years of my consulting time, I've spent a lot of time looking at the various pathways that readers take to content. We used to refer to it as routes to content. I said pathways to content. These days we tend to refer to it more as discovery channels. And our classic reader types on the left-hand side there have so many different navigational routes to get to content, the publisher's article or the article perhaps on an aggregator service on the far right-hand side. It's very, very hard to know who's doing what. And the library gets a certain view of what is happening and the publisher another. So if you bear that whole picture in mind, if you then look at perhaps what the publisher can see and what the publisher can count, well, the publisher obviously is the target site for a lot of this. So the publisher gets to see how many readers come to them from within library intermediated space, how many readers come to them from ANIs, how many people come from search engines, publisher sites, from their own site, within their own site, following alerts perhaps, or indeed links, other kinds of links, perhaps DOI links or links in peer emails and so on. But they usually don't know who those people are unless the individuals have got some kind of personalized presence on the publisher website. So they know in aggregate what these numbers are and what institutions they come from, but they don't know whether it was a researcher or a lecturer or a student within that institution that gave a hit on their website. The library, on the other hand, gets a different picture again. They get stats, of course, from the publisher, so they know how many of their readers ended up on the publisher website doing certain things, but they don't know which of their readers did those things. If the reader chooses to go via a library web intermediated space, then there's the opportunity to capture more information. I don't think many libraries are actually doing that. But at the same time, I know libraries are starting to have to work out and attach a different value to each read by different groups of the people that they serve, potentially. So there is, again, a bit of a disconnect, a different picture that the library can potentially get hold of. And again, only where readers go via library web pages, a library space, do they have a chance to capture any detailed information about the reader on the way. Now, there are technologies out there which have the potential to improve on this, Raptor being one of those in the UK, which will help fill in some of those blanks for libraries at least. Now, because there's so many unknowns in this, Tracy Gardner and I embarked yet again in 2012 on a major survey of reader navigation. And the mission really is in part to fill in some of those blanks, some of those unknowns, understand what kinds of people use what kinds of discovery resource on their way to find content. It follows on from a survey of readers that we undertook in 2005 and 2008, but this one was much bigger. Over 19,000 people filled in our survey globally. In an idle moment on a dodgem last night, I worked out that that was about 2.5 man-years of input by people across the planet. Which is an awful lot of people keyboarding into our survey. I was very happy with that. It took us over a year to plan, execute, and analyze the data. And we give enormous thanks to the publishers in this list and publishers and intermediaries in this list who supported us in this quest by sending out very, very large numbers of invitations to individuals across the world to help us get the data we needed. Very quickly, just going to cover some of the responses, breakdowns. We embarked on this project to make it with a goal of getting sufficient responses in North America, Europe, and Asia, Oceania, Africa, and South America to give us some statistical bases for our future calculations. We also wanted to make sure we had sensible numbers of people by sector, although a very large proportion of them were from the academic sector. We still had, for example, 1,700 people respond from the medical sector, 1,400 people from within government. So we still got big numbers to work with from even those smaller slices of the pie there. And again, by job roles, mostly academic researchers filled in this, but also we had 2,000 lecturers and 2,500 students across the world. So that has allowed us to play with the numbers greatly. We also were very, very careful to ask our publishers and work with publishers that could give us the appropriate subject reach so that we could get to all these different subject areas in all the different territories, and that chart there shows you how well we achieved that. So for no subject area did we get less than 200 responses, and for some, like humanities and social science, we had over 1,800 responses around the world. Now, before I go into any of the data in detail, a few of the limitations. Number one, it is a survey and carries with it all the risks and errors that surveys can do. The survey was only conducted in English, which obviously imposes some language boundaries on it in other parts of the world. The survey used invitations from our supporters and not necessarily completely representative sample, and in fact we had no control over that sample due to data privacy and protection rules. So we never got to see who was invited. We only got to see who filled in the survey. And because of the data protection, the people that were mailed and invited must have been in some way engaged. They must have opted in at some point with the given publisher. So you can expect some level of bias in there too. Broadly speaking, what did we cover? Preference of discovery resources we looked at. We looked at search engine preference, device preference, level of app use, publisher website features that were there. I'm not going to talk about all of those things, there's way too much. We did put out a report, which is available, you can see it on our website, a summary report, and also a much fuller version of the report, which has something like 90 or so charts in it. Not all of the charts I'm about to show you are in that report even. I've pulled some specific ones out and put some new ones together for this talk. But these slides, I shall say now, are available, will be available, I think, on the UKSG website afterwards to download, because there's way more information embedded in them that I'm going to be able to talk you through. So let's have a little look at what we have here. So the first thing I want to show you, just to highlight some of the differences we see in the data. First thing we did, we asked everybody and took the survey, how did they access, for the very last article they looked at, how did they do it? And that's always a nice thing to do statistically, rather than asking people to ask them how they normally behave in aggregate. Just ask them what the last thing they did was. And then we've broken that down by subject area in this chart for medicine, life sciences, and social sciences. And actually just researchers within those areas. And you see here, if you look at these two, the journal alert one and I suppose I do have this laser pointer thing. It's a bit faint, isn't it? You probably can't see that. Anyway, this one here, the journal alert and the searching for articles on a subject here. If you look at the red bars on those, which is researchers in life sciences, they say they spend nearly as much time using journal alerts as they do searching. Whereas researchers in medicine do way more time searching than they do following journal alerts. Again, what we tend to see in aggregate is quite different, and it might be different by job role very much. So this is a comparison by job role, and this time I'm looking at students, researchers, and lecturers in social sciences only. But look at the big difference here between the number of people, the students in social sciences here that use journal alerts and the amount of time they spend searching, whereas for researchers and lecturers, it's much more even activity. So perhaps it's not surprising that publishers will say, well, 60% of our usage is referred from Google. But what proportion of those referrals are actually researchers? and most publishers can't actually tell you that. They may have analytics that give them some insight to that, but it may be that the bulk of that 60% is actually undergraduate or student use generally, and there's not that much there to know. One of the other key things we looked at was we asked people what kinds of resources they used when they were searching for articles generally. And again, there's loads of information in here, but I just wanted to draw your attention to a few things. Here I'm comparing academic researchers again between life sciences, social sciences, and physics. The life sciences is in blue, and you can see this peak over here, which represents their use of professional abstracting and indexing databases. Now, when you start looking at life sciences and medicine, you tend to get a very large peak over there, we presume because of PubMed. It's obviously a very popular, free resource. This one here is interesting. This is library web pages. So much more popular here for social scientists than for life scientists and physicists. And we see that in other areas too, not just within researchers. And likewise, this aggregated content, EBSCO, ProQuest databases, so much more preferred as a starting point for social scientists than life scientists and physics. And then over here, if you look, this one here, academic search engine, obviously a Google Scholar, etc. That outweighs, for social scientists, their use of a general web search engine, a normal Google, and is actually more important than the other resources across the board for them. Likewise, for life scientists, the most important thing they say to them is A&Is and not the academic search engine. What we also did, as I said earlier, is study the data over 2005, 2008, and 2012. And I do want to just pick out a couple of things in here. Mostly this one again, library web pages. In search, this is. Has had a little bit of a boost there since 2008. So, and we see that all over the place. Actually, lots of places we've looked, there is an improvement in that library web page take-up, specifically in search. Overall, though, from this particular sample here, it was the A&Is that were still more important than all the other starting points. We looked at a different behavior as well, which is people just trying to track down the latest issues of their favorite journals, their core reading list. Over here, again, well, this thing doesn't point very well. There we go. The library web pages has been pretty flat over that period of time. But also, interestingly, journal alerts, and we saw this across large parts of our study, have declined in popularity in that time. Now, certain subject areas that's not true for, especially I think in chemistry we saw journal alerts were every bit as possible as popular as they ever were. In fact, growingly so. But other subject areas, journal alerts seem to have dropped away somewhat. But likewise, publisher investment in their own website seems to be paying off. More people just seem to have bookmarked the journal homepage. More people bookmark the publisher's website and just go there straight away rather than going through any other discovery route for that particular behavior. This is a good one. So what's the relative importance reported by the people who took the survey of library web pages by subject area? Well, the big ones, the subject areas where people really rely on them, education, research, and humanities, the other big ones over here, political, social science. Physics and astronomy is down at the bottom there, and other hard sciences are not perhaps far off, chemistry over here as well. So that's an interesting point, isn't it? What do you do about that? Do you want to do anything about it? So you could either work harder as libraries to engage users in those areas with lower counts, or of course you could ignore them because they already have better options. You could do nothing. Obviously, that's a choice for each and every library out there as to what they need to do about that to try and do they need to engage more with that group of people? Looking then at a range of library purchased discovery resources, how do they fare? What I've put here side by side is the abstracting indexing databases in blue, the library web pages in red, and full text aggregations in green. And again, arranged by all the subject areas across the bottom there. And if you look at some of them here, like in humanities, this one here, we have the position where full text aggregation seems to be more important than the library web pages, which is more important than A&I. Whereas if you go along to medicine, we have the A&I more important than the library web pages, more important than full text aggregations. And dramatically so in this area over here. Physics and astronomy, we already showed, is really low on well, we showed it was low on the library web pages, even lower on full text aggregation. Now that may of course be a reflection of the amount of physics content in aggregations, or it may be again that people have other resources, maybe people just tap into archives straight away. Again, there are always multiple possible reasons for these particular observations. We also asked people to tell us how often they perceived library technology assisted them in their, or affected them in their navigation to content. And what this is a bar chart of is the top 15 countries from which we received respondents, and the proportion of people that said that library technology affected their navigation more than half of the time. Phew, that's quite a mouthful just to explain it, isn't it? But anyway, broadly speaking, I find it quite fascinating. So out up front here is Malaysia, which seems to have a very high footprint in this area. The US is here. The UK is above it here. Australia here. As far as I can think, there are probably two factors working on this. On the one hand, you have how many libraries have actively implemented discovery technologies locally and what impact that's had, and navigate, and link servers and so on, and what effect that has had. But also, to what extent do they promote it or make it visible? Because I think a lot of libraries are also trying to make that navigational aid more invisible to the user again, and hide it a little bit more. So maybe there's two things playing off against each other. So what I'm not trying to say is that the US is necessarily more advanced than the UK at all, or the UK more than Germany. I don't really know. But the perception of readers, at least, is how much, relatively from country to country, that library technology affects them in their navigation. We also had the benefit of being able to look at their relative preference for Google over Google Scholar by subject area, and we just studied that. This chart is actually just for higher income areas of the world. And I mean, there's a ton you could read into this, but Google Scholar here seems to be more popular for social science and education research, given with the errors here, and psychology, and Google more popular for the remaining subject areas, apart from those with error bars that span the bar here. Physics, the physicists prefer Google over Google Scholar. Why is that? Well, again, there are lots of possible reasons, aren't there? But some say, I've talked to a few physicists about it, and they say, well, of course, Google Scholar covers the academic material, but when I want to do a search, I actually want to search a much broader base of material than just the academic. There could be data sets and other things which are indexed by Google, but not indexed by Google Scholar. Whereas you might well argue that social scientists really want to stick to the content indexed by Google Scholar, because doing a general search on social science type terms within Google might give you way too many answers of unrefereed content. So you can see possible reasons for these things, but there are clearly many of them again. Just a couple of other areas that we looked at just for interest here. This was a study of the use of device type in accessing journal articles by sector. Desktop and laptop are still way ahead of tablet and phone, but it's not a small amount of people were telling us they did use phones and tablet computers. And by a hair's breadth ahead, their medical sector has a slightly greater use of tablet computers than the others. Within the error bars there, nobody really has a clear lead over the others on the iPhones, but except the academic sector and government sector use them less on the phones. So probably very much as we'd expect there. You get some quite interesting results when you dig down further and start looking more regionally into that data. Here's one such example, just looking at the take-up by device this is a bit of a comparison of Europe versus Africa. The blue is students in Europe, the red is information managers in Europe, and the green is everybody we asked in Africa. So first of all, you find this in many studies. We did this because we know many other studies had shown that phone use in accessing e-resources in Africa was higher than anywhere else, and we also found the same thing. It's not dramatically higher, but it is at least a little bit higher. I hate to say it, but information managers have less access to laptops than students and more access to desktops than students, but that's probably not surprising either. And tablet use was about the level across those three categories. So what about a few possible take-home messages for this? I think from the library side, I mean, it'd be interesting to go away and see do these figures match your experiences that we've put up here, and should you develop plans to reach better, engage better with some subject areas, or are they just happy using their alternative discovery methods, not using necessarily the library technology you've deployed so much? For publishers, well, I think it's very important for publishers to understand which channels their readers in their particular disciplines utilize to discover content. Obviously, that makes a great difference. You see regional variations, you see job role variations, sector variations in that. And for publishers, obviously, always seeking to maximize usage of their content wherever they have clients, they need to really understand how those things play out differently. Maybe for the library tech providers, should they be doing something about underperforming subject areas? Is it coverage, accuracy, maybe, of coverage? Better tools for those subject areas beyond what's currently available, perhaps in web-scale discovery. Again, if researchers in physics are happier working in other search environments than web-scale discovery, why? And then for platform providers, the technology providers underpinning a lot of those publisher websites, there are so many different discovery channels available. Really, how many of those do they support? It's really quite variable across the market as to how each platform provider effectively advises its publishers to where to put their content. So I think I'm about on time, and really I'm kind of ready for that bit. And with the aid of this wonderful device, I can probably even get back to a particular slide if you have questions to ask me.